Greetings everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm your host Captain Ryan. Today's YouTube video comes to us from Dear Mr. Frodo. Dear Mr. Frodo is in the Tier 8 US destroyer, the Mighty Benson. Now as the battle gets underway, it's the Heaven map, it's a domination match mode, and Dear Mr. Frodo is headed off towards the B cap point. Not unusual for spawning on this side of the map, and he does have some backup in the form of an additional friendly destroyer coming with him. The enemy team has 3 enemy destroyers. Dear Mr. Frodo's team has 3 destroyers as well, so there is a destroyer equivalency. Neither team has the advantage, and in this kind of situation, because of the nature of the map, the destroyers are going to end up encountering each other first, so knowing how to get in there quickly, engage enemy destroyers, and then sink them and get out of there without taking too much attention from the cruisers or battleships is going to give your team an absolute advantage. Now, I always say that the Benson is the pinnacle of the US destroyer line for everything that you have learned to play with on the US destroyer line. The Fletcher at Tier 9 is the best destroyer in any line, in my opinion, but it isn't the pinnacle of the US line because you can effectively use very, very different tactics in that destroyer in order to make it solid. Dear Mr. Frodo spots the enemy Tier 7 destroyer here, the Minsk up here. He's been spotted by that destroyer, but you'll notice here that that is not actually the closest destroyer to him according to his RPF locator. The Z-23 on the enemy team is actually right behind that island. Now, of course, as he closes in on that enemy destroyer, the RPF does change, but you can see here he is still detected because he opened up with his guns, and that's going to cost him as he gets hit there from the Mogami. Now the Mogami firing armor piercing fortunately doesn't wreck him, but that is a Mogami running 155mm guns. Very, very dangerous destroyer hunter in that respect. Dear Mr. Frodo puts torpedoes into that smokescreen, but as you can see here that he is in the process of capping this cap. That tells you instantly that that enemy destroyer is no longer inside that smokescreen. They have basically bugged out, and yes, there he is. Dear Mr. Frodo once again opens up with his guns there, trying to hit him, but as he pops his smokescreen to drop off detection, so does the enemy destroyer. Now, he's continuing to fire here as he leaves his smokescreen. Not a wise decision because as he leaves the smokescreen, he is detected. That gun bloom doesn't disappear just because you were firing in smoke. It just keeps you from being directly detected. And it still does take a few seconds for that bloom to drop back down. The Benson at Tier 8 has the same exact detection as the Fletcher at Tier 9. She's got 5 main guns, though if you upgrade her to the Sea Hall, you're going to lose a gun, but you're going to gain that defensive fire. But that's not something that I'd necessarily say is a necessity. Again, you're in a destroyer. Generally speaking, you don't even want to have your anti-aircraft on. Your best factor in destroyer play is your ability to stay concealed. If you're a Russian destroyer, well, that's a different story entirely. But if you're a US destroyer, keeping concealed is always useful. The reason why the Benson is the pinnacle of the US destroyer line and not the Fletcher is because of the torpedoes. Now the Benson gets 9.5 kilometer torpedoes fully upgraded. Those are the same stock torpedoes you get on the Fletcher. But they have a very long reload by comparison. Almost a minute and 50 seconds versus the Fletcher, where you can get that down to something like a minute and 10 seconds. They're also a little bit slower and they don't do as much damage. So when you're playing the Fletcher, you can definitely play more as a stealthy torpedo boat because your torpedoes are fast, they do a lot of damage, and they reload quickly. Versus in the Benson, you really do have to take your time and make sure that your torpedoes are going to hit their target when you pop around from the sides of islands. And you gotta use your guns effectively. But remember, they're the 127mm, so they've got great rainbow arcs here, and as Dear Mr. Frodo is backing up around this island, this enemy Mogami, who's still firing armor piercing, is coming around the island. And speaking of armor piercing, Dear Mr. Frodo is firing armor piercing at these kinds of ranges, and not something that I actually recommend when you're in a US destroyer. Remember that armor piercing really most effective against enemy cruisers at ranges less than 4 kilometers. At those kinds of ranges, you can Citadel broadside cruisers, but anything more than that, and you're really going to have a difficult time getting damage. Most of your shots are probably going to shatter or ricochet. Although now you can see here, he's aiming a little bit higher. They're going into the superstructure and he's doing some damage, but I still feel that if you were firing high explosive, just like the Mogami did there, took half his health off instantly with one hit. And that's why I always say the Mogami with 155s is a DD killer, very dangerous. You can at least cause some fires and then combine that with torpedoes and get some flooding there. Now that Mogami, he is turning hard on, and that is going to save him from eating more than one of those torpedoes. But remember, Mogami Tier 8 does not get a heal ability, so he's just eaten all that damage, and that's pretty much going to be it for him, given how much damage he's taken. But because Dear Mr. Frodo caused flooding with that, he's switched over to the high explosive. He's trying to set him on fire, but you can see there he's already on fire. Somebody else on the team has set him on fire. Mogami is giving broadsides, so Dear Mr. Frodo switched back over to the armor piercing. He was close enough, but it wasn't enough to secure Dear Mr. Frodo a kill. Now the enemy team has lost one of their destroyers, but so is Dear Mr. Frodo's team. Dear Mr. Frodo's team is down 2 ships, 2 cruisers to the enemy's 1 cruiser. Dear Mr. Frodo backing up here decides to stay in a smokescreen just for that little bit longer, but sees those torpedoes coming in, hits that reverse button again. This is why I say don't stay still in smoke, keep momentum going either one way or another, just in case those torpedoes come in there. And of course that Mogami did turn broadside to get his torpedoes away into that smoke screen. It was a smart move. He was probably going to die anyway, considering he was still detected, on fire, taken a torpedo already. Not a lot of option he could do there. So looking at the situation on the map side of things, Dear Mr. Frodo's team is in prime position to put challenge on the A cap point. And they're in prime position to do this because if you look at that mini-map, that's where the mass majority of them are. So they need to go ahead, coordinate, and start pushing home that advantage. But here you can see Dear Mr. Frodo is in prime position to set ambush with his torpedoes against a couple of battleships coming up and around here. But he has to be careful. This is the German battleship. They've got that defensive hydro, which means while it isn't that long ranged of a consumable, it does last quite a while, and if you let them get within 4 kilometers of you, you're going to have a really, really bad time. Now, Dear Mr. Frodo goes ahead. He leaves his smokescreen. As you can see, the smokescreen timer ticking down. Not going to last. So he's going to get the hell out of there. Motor, he's going to keep his distance and stay out of detection range there. Just briefly spotted there, and that was partly due to the Arizona coming around that corner. But look at that. He manages to hit the Arizona. That guy wasn't even spotted. Nails him. Lovely unintended consequence there. Does manage to finally secure his first kill. But the enemy team's still up on points because they did manage to kill another ship, but now finally they're equaled out. More importantly, they're down to just 1 destroyer, which is giving Dear Mr. Frodo's team the destroyer advantage, and they have 2 of them here with more torpedoes coming out. Some of those from the friendly destroyer. They're headed towards that Bismarck, and with any luck that Bismarck will eat maybe 1 or 2 of those and cause some flooding to him. Now Dear Mr. Frodo is being detected, and that looks like it's going to be detection through radar or possibly hydro there, as that Bismarck is basically right there. But you can see here he's using the island as cover as he's pushing back here. The Bismarck is pushing around the island, Dear Mr. Frodo pushing behind the island, so this Bismarck captain can't get shots onto him because he's going to hit the island. But you see here this Bismarck captain is going to make a fatal mistake. He keeps pushing around the island, and Dear Mr. Frodo has got his torpedoes available again. So he gets both sets out at that battleship. And again, you can see this Bismarck player made a fatal mistake by continuing to push around that island. He knew there was a destroyer there. He knew that there was a destroyer there. He knew that there should be torpedoes in the water, but he didn't take a plan of action. If I were him, I would have stopped, and waited to see if that destroyer was going to put torpedoes into the water. Possibly would have reversed and forced that destroyer to actually have to come around the island where my guns and secondary batteries can wreck him before he can get into a position to deal me damage with his torpedoes. Now, Dear Mr. Frodo has managed to secure his second kill, and look at that, he's done 142,000 damage, partly thanks to that Arizona that nobody saw popping up there, eating a nice fat load of torpedoes for him. But now he's looking for targets. The enemy team no longer has any destroyers, so there's nothing at this point that can detect him without him detecting them first, with the exception of a radar cruiser. But let's be honest, you're going to see the radar cruiser before the radar cruiser sees you, and he's probably not going to pop his radar unless he knows he's being detected. RPF shows that the nearest enemy ships to Dear Mr. Frodo here are actually down at the D cap point, and the enemy team has secured the D cap point, but Dear Mr. Frodo's team has secured the A cap point. So they've kind of just switched primary caps at this point. Dear Mr. Frodo comes around the headland of this island, and he's in prime position to go ahead and secure the B cap point. At this point, that's where I would be going. I would be pushing up front and securing this location and spotting these low health ships. Look how low health the remaining enemy ships are. They don't have a lot of full strength options. Well, Dear Mr. Frodo doesn't have a lot of health. He is in a position to be able to spot these guys and put potential torpedoes downrange. Still has the armor piercing loaded, doesn't matter regardless, because that cruiser is dead. And with that cruiser dead, that leaves the enemy team with just 4, and one of them, again, didn't have a lot of health here. Now, Dear Mr. Frodo's pushing out of his smoke screen, and this is going to be good and bad, because his smoke screen generator is still active. He can create a nice long smoke screen, and his friendly ships, the friendly cruiser pushing up behind him, can go ahead and use that for cover as they push in here, should the enemy decide to pop up randomly around one of these islands. Dear Mr. Frodo using his RPF effectively, as he's going to go ahead and he's going to push back towards the B cap point. And this is actually a reasonable option if you're in a destroyer to go ahead and do that, because you know that the enemy team is basically just circling the map at this point, so you know they're going to be pushing around towards the B cap point. Now, he shorts both of these torpedoes as he tries not to beach himself and doesn't quite successfully avoid it. He doesn't have a lot of room here as far as his concealment ranges and the range to target. So he has to be absolutely careful, because if he comes around here and the enemy spots him, he's a dead man. He doesn't open up because the friendly destroyer behind him is opening up. And as you can see there, the shots in from that Tirpitz's secondaries wrecking him. That Tirpitz is very low health. He's not going to go ahead and try to secure this kill from this friendly destroyer, but this friendly destroyer also has more health than Dear Mr. Frodo as well, so he can afford to take some of these secondary hits. Dear Mr. Frodo, probably not so much. Frodo does manage to land a torpedo on the Aoba that's in the back there, but doesn't actually hit the battleship that he was hoping to. Of course, that battleship dead anyway, and now that Aoba not such in a good position, because he's got pretty much everybody shooting at him, and he's got at least one destroyer targeting him anyway. So if he has the priority target, he's probably gone to brown alert moments at this point. Given that this ship is really the only one that's in a position to shoot at Frodo, Frodo goes ahead and opens up with his guns. But look at that, there's not a lot of time left now, and his team is pretty much 1 kill away from securing victory. And there, oh man, Mr. Frodo manages to secure it just by the skin of that ship's teeth. Earns himself 163,000 damage in that game. Only accolades though, Devastating Strike and High Caliber with 3 kills, but a very excellent use of the Benson, utilizing its guns, utilizing the island and ambush tactics that you learn with the destroyers early on, especially the US line. Remember though, once you get to the Fletcher, you gotta switch up those tactics and become a torpedo boat and not a gunboat, because you're not gonna be able to perform as well as a result. Top of the team for XP earned, well over 2,000 base XP for Dear Mr. Frodo. Anyway, that's it for today's video, folks. If you like that video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment down below. If you'd like to get semi-regular channel news and updates, as well as my live streaming schedule for the week, you can do so by liking and following me on Facebook. If you'd like to help support me in the channel, and I encourage you to please do so because YouTube's new monetizing algorithms are demonetizing or heavily demonetizing a lot of my content because YouTube, any support level, even $1 a month, goes a long way to help support me and the channel grow. You can do that by becoming my supporter on Patreon, and every support level will gain some additional perks. If you've got a replay like this one that you'd like to see featured on my channel, you can send it to my email, and if you'd like to watch me play various games live, you can follow me on Twitch. You can find the links for all of those in the video description down below, and as always, we will see you next time. This is Captain Rye, signing off.